It started with a sentence. Small, quiet, almost casual. But as soon as Janelle spoke those words, you could feel the air in the room shift. Robyn wouldn't have survived back then. That sentence didn't echo, it detonated. Suddenly, the illusion shattered. Because that one line wasn't just about discomfort or preference. It was an indictment of everything Robyn claimed to believe in. A challenge to the curated narrative, the tears, the speeches, the reverent language she used to describe plural marriage. After all the glossy excuses and emotional appeals, there it was. Raw truth. Robyn wanted the dream, not the reality she walked into. And the women who lived that reality could see the difference from day one. This was never the version of the family that existed in Lehi. The world Robyn entered was already softened by recognition, poached by cameras, held up by network money and staged footage. She didn't meet the hunger or the sacrifice, only the edited version scrubbed clean for audience sympathy. And even then, she struggled. Complaints about being alone, about Kody being pulled in too many directions, about not having enough say in where and how they lived. But Lehi didn't offer any of that. It couldn't. That house was cramped, tense, built on endurance. Relationships were negotiated quietly over bedrooms and kids needing help, not emotional consultations and well-timed breakdowns. Janelle wasn't being cruel when she said it. She wasn't trying to humiliate anyone. She was telling the truth as only someone who earned it could, because Janelle lived it. She lived the scarcity. She lived the emotional rotation. She lived the version of plural marriage that didn't come with upgrades or applause. So she knew what it meant to endure, and she knew what it looked like when someone only wanted the costume of commitment, not the weight. The real version of the family didn't have space for someone needing constant reassurance. There were too many mouths to feed, too many kids in the hallway, too many quiet decisions made between bathroom doors and gas station budgets. You didn't get one-on-one time unless someone else gave something up. And for the original three wives, everything was a trade-off. Space, sleep, emotion, time. They knew how to live inside a system that gave back almost nothing for months at a time. That's the part Robyn didn't understand. Or maybe chose not to. It's easy to celebrate sisterhood when you're not sacrificing anything for it. It's easy to romanticize polygamy when you enter as the spotlight wife. And it's easy to call something faith when the hard parts are absorbed by other people. What Robyn wanted wasn't plural marriage. What she wanted was a curated life where she got legal standing, emotional priority, and shared labor from women carrying her load while being accused of jealousy anytime they asked for basic fairness. She spoke the language of us, but lived the schedule of me. And every time Kody adjusted his attention to suit her emotional needs, it wasn't just a husband's mistake. It was evidence that the structure itself had failed. The balance that once held the family together, weak and imperfect as it was, had been tipped. The old model was built on compromise. It wasn't perfect, but it operated on need and survival. Robyn's version was built on perception, on image, on emotion, on the idea of being the peacemaker without ever living in the actual storm. But here's the twist no one admits out loud. Robyn didn't destroy the old system. She replaced it, and what replaced it wasn't plural marriage. It was monogamy in disguise, one legal wife, one primary house, one relationship that functioned apart while being spoken about as if it belonged to everyone. The camera doesn't always need to show cruelty for the damage to be real. Sometimes, a silent shift in focus is enough. And that's exactly what Janelle was pointing at. Robyn wouldn't have made it in Lehi, because Lehi was never built to revolve around one woman's preferences. And now, years later, as the family stands cracked in half, the echo of that moment plays over and over again, not in shouting or scandal, but in silence, in the distance between what Robyn said she believed and what she was willing to live. Lehi wasn't painted walls and Pinterest dreams. It wasn't interviews with producers or smiling confessionals clipped with soft music. The early version of this family was never built for comfort. It was built for survival. And for Christine, Janelle, and Mary, that meant giving until there was nothing left in the tank. Then turning around and doing it again because there was no one else coming to lift the weight. Back then, the emotional and financial load didn't rotate. It piled, bills were constant, food was stretched, rooms were shared by too many bodies and too little sleep. And still, they kept going. Because the belief was real, or at the very least, the commitment was. Sometimes those two things are hard to separate. They didn't have the luxury of being emotional about every lost moment. They didn't have time to constantly negotiate feelings. Their days were claimed before sunrise by crying babies, busted car tires, or endless grocery lists that didn't match what was in the bank. Christine ran the house. Janelle went to work. Mary held it down as best she could. Between them, they created a system, imperfect, fragile, but it kept the family moving. There were no glam dresses or professional makeup sessions. No stylists prepping them for TV. Christine has said it herself, she was last, always last. The meals were last, the attention was last, the financial comfort was non-existent. Her job was to make do with a song and a smile, even on days when her heart couldn't carry it. Mary carried the burden of being first, and then being forgotten. She had Kody legally, but emotionally lost him early. And Janelle, pragmatic and private, buried everything just to hold the finances together. She worked long hours outside while still co-parenting inside, living in homes that were sometimes missing hot water or enough space for her kids to stretch without running into someone else. That's the home Robyn never knew, the house with one oven, one fridge, and 4, 5, sometimes 10 children spinning like planets around 3 exhausted women holding the center. There's a quiet kind of strength that grows in chaos. But strength isn't always soft, and the sharp silence when something breaks, they lived with that every week. Problems didn't get fixed right away, some never were. Appliances broke, tempers snapped, and yet the wives stayed tethered. Not because it was romantic, because they believed in the structure. And no matter how it rattled, it was still standing. When Robyn speaks about the dream, the sisterhood, the shared life, the eternal love, she's repeating something those women used to tell themselves just to make it through the next hard season. Only they weren't performing. They were surviving, and that difference matters. Robyn stepped into a family already numbed by decades of adjustment. She arrived when the kitchen was finally stocked and the house had quiet corners. Not because someone handed her comfort, but because someone else burned out earning it. You can trace the exhaustion in Christine's eyes in the early seasons, a mother who gave so much of herself that, by the time the camera arrived, there was barely anything left to film. You can see the distance growing in Janelle, the way she pulled back emotionally over time, not out of hatred, but self-preservation. And Mary's smile wasn't starry-eyed admiration. It was muscle memory. She had played the gracious wife long enough for it to crack without anyone offering tape. Each woman, flawed, human, sometimes wrong, built something real with sweat and silence. Their sacrifices weren't symbolic. They had names, chores, bills, and diapers. And when Robyn breathed life into a version of plural marriage designed around harmony and dinner nights, what she was actually describing was fiction. That's why nothing worked once the foundation was tested. The family wasn't breaking. It had already broken. And all Robyn brought was the expectation that the cracks would magically respond to hope and tears. But Christine and Janelle, they knew better, because they built the house knowing hope isn't what holds a family together. Sacrifice does. And no matter how beautiful the language sounded coming from Robyn's mouth, she never once showed she was willing to pay the same price to make it last. When Robyn first walked into their lives, she didn't just bring herself, she brought a shift. Something subtle at first. A change you could only spot if you'd been watching closely, like the flick of Kody's posture when she entered a room, or the way his smile lingered 2 seconds longer with her than with the others. And maybe people wanted to believe it was innocent. Maybe the family even tried to convince themselves this was all just the excitement of a new addition. But it didn't take long before that excitement started to feel like division. Because here's what fans noticed, and what many of the wives likely felt but didn't fully voice at the time. Kody wasn't acting like a man carefully bringing in a 4th wife. He was acting like a teenager in love. And everything Robyn did, every sigh, every tear, every look down and away suddenly became the emotional core of every scene. The official version of the story was polished, all laid out like a respectful courtship guided by faith. But the real timeline, the way Robyn's kids were calling him Dad before marriage, the way he was already emotionally embedded in her household before any spiritual ceremony had taken place, it didn't ring true. This wasn't a man gently introducing his new partner while balancing existing family dynamics. This was someone already crossing boundaries, showing up, tucking in her kids, making her feel like the center before even earning that place. And the wives felt it. Christine especially, you could see it in quiet moments on camera, in her tired eyes and forced cheerfulness. She was still pregnant, still raising kids, still doing the invisible labor that anchored the family, while Kody's emotional energy drifted further into Robyn's orbit. There's this moment in family storytelling where viewers stop rooting for happiness and start watching for the cracks. That moment came fast. Something about how Robyn moved through this family didn't look like integration. It looked like replacement. Soft, slow, and dressed in performative humility, but it was clear, this wasn't about joining the family. It was the beginning of redefining it. The courtship took months, much longer than Kody's past relationships, and while they claimed it was to remain pure, devout, respectful, the reality felt more calculated. Suspiciously timed for television, conveniently spaced out for production windows, and the fans, they caught on quick. The show was saying one thing, the footage was showing something else. And no one could explain away the premarital dates that looked a little too cozy, or the growing neglect of the other wives in tandem with Robyn's rising visibility. Then there was the legal marriage. That move didn't happen overnight, but when it did, it landed like a blow the family never recovered from. Mary, the only person who held that official title until then, gave it up. On paper, for custody protections. But emotionally, it was a confirmation of what many already feared. Robyn wasn't just another wife. She was the wife. And that changed everything. The weight of history, the decades of compromise and unglamorous sacrifice by Christine, Janelle, and Mary, none of it seemed to matter anymore. Love got edited, commitment got redefined, all in favor of something or someone more palatable for the audience. And the tension, it never actually exploded. That's what made it worse. There was no dramatic fight, no eruption. Just a slow fade, an erosion. A quiet unraveling as the original three wives began to realize this wasn't the same family anymore no matter how often Robyn called it sacred. She arrived like a prayer. Polished, poised. But in her footsteps, there was a silence that said too much was already being rewritten, and no one dared call it what it really was, the beginning of the end. Before the adults ever admitted it, the kids already knew. Not in full sentences, not in dramatic sit-downs, but in the way they started pulling away, slowly, quietly, instinctively, like their hearts had already figured out something that would take years for the rest of the family to say out loud. There's one moment people can't forget. Christine is in bed, the room calm, dim, settled. She's reading to her kids, finishing what looked like a rare peaceful night in a home always stretched thin. And then it happens. Kody bursts in. Loud, dramatic, full of bluster. He leaps onto the bed like he's putting on a show because he is. And without a word, Peyton gets up. No fight, no teenage tantrum, no eye-rolling, he just leaves. Because the performance wasn't for him, it wasn't about him. The moment that had been soft and sincere before was now hijacked, and even as a child, he knew exactly what that meant. That wasn't bedtime, that was ego. Peyton's exit said more than any confessional ever could. It said, "This isn't for us anymore." And what made the moment land even harder, no one seemed to notice he had gone. For years, the show painted a picture of shared parenting, unified love, balanced households. But in the quiet glances between siblings, in the side comments barely picked up by mics, that illusion was already breaking down. Christine's kids, Janelle's children, they knew what inconsistency felt like. They knew who showed up and who didn't. You don't have to be an adult to feel abandonment. You just have to be around enough to see absence explained as leadership. And the contrast became undeniable. As Kody drifted closer to Robyn's home, her kids became a new center of gravity. They had his time, his energy, his softness. And Christine's children, Janelle's children, watched from the outside, learning not to expect too much. Visits were late, boundaries were forgotten, holidays were uneven. Gradually, the emotional economy in this family restructured itself around one house, and everyone else just had to adjust. What's tragic is how quietly the kids bore that weight, how they stopped asking, stopped reacting. Some gave polite smiles during family gatherings, others gave nothing at all. A few, like Gabe and Garrison, eventually spoke up. Most didn't. They just withdrew. Because there's only so many times you can be disappointed before you stop showing up to be let down. Christine's kids often formed their own protective unit, laughing together, shielding each other, finding consistency in their mother's love even when the greater structure abandoned them. Janelle's kids, older, more observing, started questioning with facts. They had data, who called back, who remembered birthdays, who came to the house without cameras around. And behind all of it, there was a deep, barely spoken ache. Children who once believed in the big dream of one family slowly stopped believing. Not because of any single act, but because of everything that didn't happen, the small absences that stacked until it became impossible to unsee the reality. The tragedy isn't that the children grew apart. The tragedy is that they learned they were supposed to carry silence, while the adults clung to a version of unity that no longer existed. By the time Kody started preaching about loyalty and respect again, most of them weren't listening. Not out of defiance, out of grief. They'd already watched the family slip away while their parents fought to defend something broken. And the real heartbreak? If the adults had listened earlier, Peyton's quiet exit might have been seen for what it was, a warning. One the family chose not to hear. By the time Kody's apologies started showing up, it was already too late. The damage wasn't fresh, it had settled in, years deep, etched into the eyes of kids barely speaking to him and wives who no longer pretended to grieve his absence. But suddenly, he wanted to rewrite the story. Not from remorse, from necessity. From the desire to wrestle back control of a narrative he spent seasons unraveling, but now, suddenly, wanted to stitch together with tears and throw away regrets. He called it accountability. Fans called it performance. In the confessionals, Kody spoke with that same rehearsed sincerity, eyes a little too wet, tone just a little too soft. "I made mistakes," he said. "I didn't show up the way I should have. But let's be honest, apologies don't mean much when you waited until everyone else walked away to say them. Until one wife left and remarried, another disconnected emotionally, and the last hung on with frayed belief and nothing else. And even then, it still wasn't about their pain. It was about his story, his image, his legacy. He didn't apologize to repair, he apologized to reframe. And each confession came with a spin. Christine leaving. He helped her find happiness. Janelle's distance, she pushed him out. Mary's heartbreak, old news. He pivoted each loss into character development for him, not them. Not the ones who cried off camera, held screaming babies, and built that flawed, chaotic household with fingernails and faith. He was no longer the absent husband. He had become the misunderstood patriarch, but fans saw through it. Because no real change ever followed the words. No consistent presence. No deep action. No, I showed up at my kid's house quietly, without cameras, to fix something I destroyed. And the only time emotion cracked through. When his authority was questioned. Not his love, his control. Then there was Robyn, standing in the corner of every scene with tears ready on command. Not surprising, the crying had become a fixture. The same quivering voice talking about how hard it all was for her. How painful Christine's choice was. How isolated she felt. And yet, almost never acknowledging why the separation happened in the first place. That's the difference between pain and victimhood. One sits with what's real. The other tries to steer the story. Robyn wanted to mourn the crumbling unity while still placing herself in the role of innocent observer, as if all this heartbreak simply happened to her. But viewers weren't buying it anymore. Too many skipped moments, too many times her comfort came first and her empathy came after. The script was clear: Robyn cries and Kody comes running. Everyone else cries and Kody questions their loyalty. And still, they tried to sell it. A united front, regret dressed up as insight, loving words layered over seasons of slow erosion. The family is healing, they suggested. But healing requires truth, and truth was always the first casualty in their story. You can't walk viewers through 18 seasons of emotional neglect, favoritism, disrespect, and absence, and then ask for forgiveness in a monologue. And when Christine stood calmly across from him, unmoved by his apologies, refusing to feed his redemption arc, that was the moment that rang clear. He wanted tears, she gave him peace. And peace isn't as camera-friendly when it doesn't include him. People don't want staged growth, they want reckoning. But what they got was a soft rehearsal of everything he wished was true, long after anyone was willing to pretend he meant it. By then, the truth didn't need to speak loudly. It was written in the people who stopped showing up for him, not out of anger, but because belief can only be betrayed so many times before silence becomes the only honest answer left. This isn't the story Robyn imagined. Not the ending she cried for. Not the family she wept over in soft focus interviews, repeating over and over how hard she worked to bring everyone together. Because now, there's no togetherness left. Just her. One wife, sitting in the shadow of a dream that collapsed on its own weight. And in some cruel, poetic way, she got exactly what she wanted. The legal title. The full-time access. The silent house. The singular role beside Kody. But it doesn't look like victory, it looks like isolation. Kody, now drained from the wreckage he helped cause, isn't the husband she first chased. His energy, gone. His patience, sharp and resentful. His presence, there, but only in bursts that flicker between entitlement and self-pity. The man who once danced around in leather jackets and crowned himself the head of a progressive, chosen family, is hollowed out now. Bitter, defensive. And when he speaks about family, it's either in blame or delusion. Everything is someone else's fault. He is the victim of abandonment, never the architect of it. And Robyn sits beside him, nodding too often, blinking back tears that don't change anything, clutching the same vocabulary of together and faith and our promise, and still no one is really listening. Because here's the irony no one misses: she won. Robyn outlasted them all, she stayed, she kept the ring, she became the legal wife, the official one, but what lives in the quiet around her now is not peace, it's weight. There's no Christine to absorb the overflow of frustration, no Janelle to carry the checkbook and the calm, no Mary to sit silently in the corner, absorbing his coldness year after year. Robyn is not part of the family anymore. She is the family, and that throne she found herself on, turns out it comes with no kingdom. There's no sisterhood to soften the hard days. No shared responsibilities, no children running between houses. Most of them are grown, and the ones still around seem tired of picking sides in a war that only ever served the ego of two parents pretending to be misunderstood. The house is quiet now. Still. And Robyn wears it on her face, the exhaustion. Not theatrical this time, not for tears or sympathy points. Real fatigue, real disappointment. The cost of clinging so tightly to a story while it unraveled in her hands. She wanted the life her mother believed in. She wanted plural marriage that made love feel eternal and community feel divine. But what she really wanted was that warmth without having to carry the cold. And what she got, after years of centering herself in the family's emotional economy, was silence. Will she leave? That's always the question fans circle. Some think she will. that eventually the loneliness will speak louder than the legacy. Others think she never will, that she'll stay because that final walk would feel too much like a failed bet. But maybe she already knows there's nowhere to go. That the spotlight she once cried under now offers no protection. She has to manage the gaze alone, no one else is left to absorb the fallout. Christine found love again, Janelle found herself. Even Mary, tangled in decades of complicated loyalty, finally walked away. And Robyn, she stayed. But what is she really staying for now? For Kody, who no longer inspires devotion, only debate. For the family, that no longer exists. Or maybe she stays because now no one else is left to blame. No more rival wives to compete with. No more scapegoats to explain Kody's failures. Her place is secure, and that's the real tragedy. Because every win she accumulated came layered with someone else's loss. Christine's freedom was bought with years of heartbreak. Janelle's clarity came after being emotionally sidelined. Mary's endurance never earned her what Robyn received by simply arriving at the right moment. And now, Robyn holds everything. Except joy, except ease, except the one thing plural marriage was supposedly built to provide: shared strength. All that's left is a man too tired to lead and a woman too isolated to step forward. So the silence continues. And maybe that's the answer no one wants to hear. Maybe she stays not out of love, but because leaving would mean finally admitting what everyone else already knows. That what looked like devotion was control. That what sounded like tears was manipulation. And that the dream she fought so hard to protect was never built to hold reality. It only worked when someone else was paying the emotional cost. But now, there's no one left to carry the burden. And all she has is a quiet house, a bitter man, and a legacy too fractured to rebuild. If you lived through what Robyn created, would you stay? Or would you walk, even if it meant walking alone? Let me know in the comments.